Today we're continuing on in Unfinished Tales with Nienor and Brethil. If you're new here, welcome to Heart of a Halfling, where we talk about Lord of the Rings and do some Lord of the Ring things. So let's get started. So last we left off, Nienor had completely lost her memory, and she was running away from an orc attack that was attacking Moblung and some other elves. So now we have her running in the woods. She hears the shouting in the background, and she's so afraid, she begins to tear her clothes off and cast them aside until she is left completely naked and is running. It's described as a beast that is hunted to heart bursting, and she's just out scared and afraid. And finally, though, some time passes in her running and she kind of calms down, and she is just lost now. She can't speak, she can't, she doesn't have any memory or anything. She's just out naked. But she finds a spot when she's calmed down. She falls asleep and she wakes up in the next morning, sort of, a new light of day. And she is in a strange place. She doesn't know what anything's called. She doesn't know what her own name is, let alone anything else. And she begins to sort of forage for some food and water. It says that she's climbing trees and just trying to do the best she can, but she is still frightened. So she begins to, continue to wander on, and she comes to the river Teglin. She begins to drink, but she doesn't really have any food to sustain herself. And she finally gets to this little dark space, or out of this dark space onto this little mound, and just passes out. And now it's raining, and so she's cold and naked and scared and just has no idea what's going on. And she just faints on this mound. And it says by chance that some of the woodmen of Brethil have come by at the same hour after having just gotten some orcs to go away. They've just attacked some orcs. And this big flash of lightning comes, and they see on the mound of Howdeth Eleth a woman laying there on this mound. And Turin is sort of startled by this because he thinks it's Finduilah, so he's a little frightened. But the men go up to the mound and they're like, no, you got to come here. There's this young woman just lying here. So Turin goes and picks her up, and she's shivering and she's not responding to anything that they're saying. And seeing that she's naked, he takes a cloak and he covers her up. And they begin to head home. As they're going on, though, Turin's trying to talk to Nienor, and he's asking her who she is, where does she come from, because he is hoping to send news back to her family. And she doesn't say anything, she just cries. And so he's like, okay, well, maybe something really traumatic has happened and we just won't talk about it right now. And so they're continuing on, and it says that as they are heading back to Brethil, that a fever comes over Nienor, and which makes sense, right? She's out in the cold and the rain. So she has this fever, and so now they're in more of a rush to hurry up and get her to Brandir. And they finally get there, and they lay her in Brandir's healing place, his home, wherever it is. And they lay her down so that he can begin to work on her, and he uses all of the skills he has to try and heal her. There's women there that are constantly at her side, just trying to aid her. But the group notices that Nienor, who's now called Nieniel because she only cries, that Turin, when Turin comes in, that's the only time that Nienor calms down, that she's able to sleep at peace, is when Turin is there. And some time goes by, and Nienor is slowly starting to get better. The women are teaching her how to talk, they're teaching her their language, and she begins to ask, what's the name of this? What's the name of this? And she keeps going. And as she grows in strength, she spends more time with Brandir because he knows the name of everything. He's very knowledgeable. So she spends quite a bit of time with him trying to know what the name of things are. But she only ever smiles or laughs when she's around Turin. And so now that she's gained her strength and she's talking, she goes to Turin and she goes, no, I've asked the name of everything except for you. What's your name? And he goes, Turinbar. And so she pauses, and it says that she kind of listens to see if there's an echo of a memory of this. And she asks him, does this name mean something, or is that just your name? And he says it means the master of the dark shadow. And he says, it's because I've also had a darkness that I've escaped from. And at this point, Nienor has expressed many times that she can't remember things because of a darkness. And so Turin here is relating to that feeling. And she asks him, when were you able to escape from this darkness? And he goes, oh, when you arrived. Sorry. He says, when you arrived. And that, he spent many years trying to escape this, but nothing ever changed until she got there. And then it was like a new light of day came, and he just felt so much happier when she was there. And so now, they're kind of set in this new life in Brethil. We have Brandir, who Nienor sees more as a brother, but Brandir has fallen in love with Nienor as well as Turin. So a year goes by, and it says that this has been a time of peace, that everything's been pretty good, that the orcs kind of stay away, and they haven't really had any interaction with Glaurung, and so this has been a good, peaceful time. And Nienor is now completely healed. She's sort of finding her rhythm in Brethil. And so Turin comes up to her and says he wants to marry her. And Nienor is quite excited about this. And so she goes and tells her brother. She goes and tells Brandir. And Brandir, he gets a little heartbroken over this and says, no, you can't marry him. Like, don't think in such haste. There's something about Turin or about Turinbar that darkness just seems to follow him. And here he explains that Turinbar has been rumored to be Turin, but she doesn't really know what that means. But she doesn't like that Brandir is hesitant for her to marry Turin. Like, she's taken his opinion to heart. And so she goes to Turin and she's like, oh, you know what, let's wait on this. Like, I'm just not sure about this. And she tells him that this change of feeling is because of Brandir's warning, which upsets Turin, of course. So some time goes by, and Turin, after a few months, comes back to Nienor and is like, I want to marry you. If I marry you, I won't go to war unless it's to defend you in our home. And this is good enough for her. Like, she likes this hearing. She had mentioned to Brandir that, it would be better for her to marry him and then to be fearful of him dying, out fighting and not be married to him. And that maybe if she was married, then she could keep him home more. And that's essentially what Turin is saying here, is like, if I marry you, I'll stay here. And so that's good enough for Nienor. And so she marries him. They get married, and everything seems to be happy at the moment, except Brandir, who is troubled, and he knows that something isn't right. And that's it for this section. So there you go. This was a short section, very interesting section, and maybe other people have caught on to this and it just took me a minute. I don't know. But I found it interesting that at the beginning of this section, Nienor is described as running as a beast that is being hunted, which is very similar to the insult that Sauros gave Turin at the beginning, which, if you don't remember, Sauros is the guy who was mocking Turin, and then Turin basically stripped him down naked to humiliate him. And in Sauros' humiliation and fear, he ended up running off of a cliff. And that's the whole reason why Turin left. But during their initial arguments with one another. Cyrus had made a mention of, if all the men are as sort of scruffy looking as Turin was in this moment, then the women must be clad in only their hair like deers. And here, this is kind of how we see Nienor. And she's also like climbing trees and still very, very beast-like. So I just found that interesting. And then the whole thing, and I mentioned this in my Let's Talk About Nienor and Nienor. When she sees Turin, when he's rescuing her from her fearful naked state, it almost seems like she instantly has a love for him. And again, I think this is unknowingly a brotherly love. Like, she doesn't know who he is, but I think there's just something innate in her who knows who Turin is, but she doesn't know how to categorize that. And so she instantly falls in love with Turin. And I find her story just so heartbreaking, because she really just wanted family around to love her. That's all she wanted. She didn't have her father around. She didn't have her brother around. And Morwen, I could say, did the best that she could in the state that she was in, but it wasn't very affectionate. And maybe she didn't have that luxury to be affectionate with Nienor. But you can see where Nienor is just sort of clinging out to any love she can find, even in the state where she has no memory. So her story is just really heartbreaking to me. But there you go. That is this story, or this section. It does feel a little icky because they are siblings, but they don't know that. So I don't know. Maybe I can kind of overlook it and get over it for a second. But yeah, that's this section. It's short and sweet and to the point. And there you go. And the next one, we will be getting back to Glaurung. We're wrapping up this story. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Of course, I hope you guys have a blessed week. And lastly, I hope that your homes are filled with food and cheer. Bye!